Death, the elephant in the room. Part 1. An opening haiku poem. Footprints washed away by rain after the campfire goes out. Part 1. The silk cloth and the mountain. I'm glad you could be here. Getting here wasn't simple. In fact, it was probably harder than it looks. For you to be sitting here now. For it to happen, countless drifting atoms had to come together in just the right way, at just the right time, and stay together long enough to make you. It is a highly particular arrangement. It's so particular, in fact, that it has never occurred before and will never occur again in quite the same way. We hope that for many number of years, these atomic particles are going to continue to cooperate. They will take part in billions of small, precise, coordinated actions that allow you to experience the quite remarkable condition we call being alive. Why atoms do this at all is something of a mystery. Being you is not especially rewarding from the point of view of the atoms. Your atoms don't really concern themselves about you. They don't know who you are. They don't even know that they are there. Atoms are not really alive. They have no interest in meaning or memory or survival. And yet for a time they act together as if they did. If your body was taken apart one atom at a time, at the end there would be just a small mound of fine ordinary dust. None of it would ever have been alive, and all of it would once have been part of your body and for the duration of your life. Your skin cells are all dead. It is a somewhat disagreeable notion to reflect that every inch of your surface is deceased. If you are an average-sized adult, you are lugging around over 2 kilograms of dead skin, of which several billion tiny fragments are discarded each day. Run a finger along a dusty shelf, and you are drawing a pattern, very largely in old skin. These atomic particles, while part of the body, respond to a single and steady instruction, which is, keep this arrangement going. But atoms are not loyal. Their attention wanders. Even a long human life amounts to only about, say, 650,000 hours. When that modest total is reached, or somewhere near it, for reasons we still don't fully understand, the atoms simply stop cooperating. They close things down. They come apart quietly. They move on to become something else. That, as far as we can tell, is the end of the physical arrangement, known as you. Still, it is worth noticing that it happens at all. Across most of the universe, as far as we know, it doesn't. The atoms that assemble themselves so obligingly to make life here on Earth are the same atoms that have not done it elsewhere. At an atomic level, at the level of chemistry, Life is really not exotic. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, a little calcium, a trace of sulfur. There's nothing you wouldn't find in an ordinary Watson's or Guardian pharmacy like the one down at Pulauticus. The unusual thing about these atoms is that for a time they arranged themselves as you. That if anything is the miracle, inside you, this coming together and coming apart is already happening. Every day, billions of your cells die, and they do not kind of collapse in panic. They do not cling. They dismantle themselves carefully, piece by piece, and are quietly recycled. The process even has a name: programmed cell death. Other cells take their place, and the system carries on. Most of the time, cells don't die because something went wrong. They die because they're told to. In fact, unless a cell is actively instructed to live, it will quietly end itself. So you don't have to understand this fully. Just noticing everyday life is more than enough. Cells, it turns out, require constant reassurance. The wonder is not that things occasionally fail, but that they work as smoothly as they do for decades on end. Trillions of tiny mindless processes, chemical reactions, signals, exchanges add up to a single, moving, thinking, feeling human being. No one is in charge. Nothing is supervising. And yet, for a while, it all holds together. So when we speak of death, it may be worth remembering this, that at death, nothing spectacular is being introduced. At death, nothing unnatural is arriving. The body has been practicing letting go all along. How long has this been going on? The Buddha once said, life in samsara has no beginning. How long has life been assembling, disassembling, reassembling? A very, very, very long time. To help get a sense of that, to consider the time life has been regenerating itself, he said, imagine how long it would take for a silk cloth brushed against a huge mountain just once every century. How long would it take to wear that huge mountain away? That's how long. The blind turtle. He also invited us to reflect on how fortunate and rare human birth is. He said, how rare is it? Well, imagine how rare it is that a blind turtle in a vast ocean, if it was surfacing once in 100 years and finding its head already stuck inside a floating egg yolk, well, what are the chances of that? The burning anthill. There is a sutta where Buddha compares this body and mind to an anthill, bustling with nervous activity. It fumes by night with thinking and activity, and flames by day with livelihood, speech, and actions. Practice is described as digging with a sword, seeking truth and peace into the anthill. Along the way, there are sticking points, dilemmas, and forked paths, where we puzzle and hesitate, investigating truths. And finally, something that is left undisturbed, deep within the center of the chaos, our coiled, hidden, intuitive powers, that we should highly respect above all else, as if at the heart of the anthill we found a cobra. Reflections for you. As you hear this, you might notice how familiar much of it already is. All of us have watched our bodies quietly change, all without asking our permission, healing themselves, wearing out, adapting, slowing. You may recognize how much of life has already been lived without your direct control. Breathing through the night, wounds closing and healing, bones fixing themselves, cells coming and going. Perhaps this brings to mind moments when the body knew what to do long before the mind did. The body resting you, the body stopping you, or gently insisting on change. And you might sense that even now, in ordinary daily life, letting go is already happening in small, little ways, not big without announcement, simply as part of how life continues. Part 2. Lives interrupted in mid-sentence. I remember my mum laughing and laughing. She was describing her ladies' watercolour painting group when they were telling stories from their lives, tragedies and comedies they had experienced. One of them described her second wedding day. The wedding ceremony had happened. Afterwards, at the dinner reception, the meal was served. Her new husband, sitting next to her, was politely making conversation and eating a meal of fish and drinking wine. And then a fishbone caught in his throat. He choked. He coughed again. He spluttered. He slapped the table. Concerned people rushed forward and slapped his back. His face was going incredibly red and purple. He choked more. He spluttered, and he fell forward onto the table, unmoving. He was dead. The marriage had lasted only a few hours. As COVID arrived in the Philippines, a teenage girl from my class, Zassie, lost her father suddenly. There was no hospital visit, no last words. The next day, national lockdown began. He had died while away from home at a crowded gambling event. By the afternoon, paperwork had already begun. Sometimes this is how death happens. There are stories in the Suttas of beauty and youth ending suddenly. In one, a dancer taken out for pleasure garden by princes, dying unexpectedly before the afternoon was over. And in another, Sirima, known for her stunning beauty, died. Her body, by now decaying, was left on display at the request of the Buddha. The mind of the beautiful lady had been reborn as a deva, and she returned to look at the scene. The enlightening result was anagami attainment for her. Filipino Rhodora became pregnant. Tragically, she lost the baby. Not long afterwards, her health collapsed. She was admitted to intensive care. There was a sudden coma, and then she died. Gloria was 21. She had been a healthy young lady, and then cancer of the spine arrived. Within a year, just only 1 year, her body had become extremely thin, her legs narrowed. Through her stomach, her spine showed. She died soon afterwards. Again in the Philippines, during heavy monsoon rains, I had been coughing continuously. Between coughs, I asked a neighbor to buy some cough medicine, which they did. I took too much. I took way too much. I also took other tablets at the same time. Soon, strange things began to happen. I was hallucinating. My body was becoming enormously heavy. I found I couldn't speak. I couldn't move properly. I hadn't understood that it was the medicine. Eventually, I crawled, half paralyzed, to the road. Someone helped me get to the hospital. The doctor examined me and then said, "You have had a transient stroke." I was told I may not walk ever again, that I had lost the power of speech. It was a great shock. Yet after 7 hours or so later, movement and feeling slowly began to return, and then speech. It had not been a stroke after all. It had just been the overdose of cough medicine. As you hear these stories, you might simply notice what happens inside you without needing to explain it or make sense of it. You may recognize how often life changes mid-sentence without warning, preparation, or permission. You might reflect on how rarely endings arrive neatly and how often they interrupt ordinary moments, meals, conversations, plans, and routines. You could gently ask yourself whether you live as if things will finish later, or whether you've noticed how often they finish in the middle. You might observe how the body reacts first, tightening, holding, going quiet, before any thoughts appear. And you may simply rest with this question without needing an answer. Part 3, looking for shelter. And then there's fear. Have you ever been really, really frightened in the night when you are far from home, alone? Once, while I was in England, I decided to undergo spiritual practice by walking alone many, many miles as an undercover monk, wandering with no shoes, no money, one blanket, a sleeping bag, some warmer clothing. And yet, wherever I found myself, and this was in the deep countryside, southwest England, Devon, I would sleep somewhere, in a barn, under a bush, near a tree. I would just find places. It was getting murky one evening, and I noticed across the mist a long sweeping field surrounded by dark forests. And it seemed to have some kind of, what looked to me like kind of temporary shelters. They were about chest high. Each one was a curved arch of corrugated iron, resting on the ground, with a single flat sheet at the back, held in place by wooden stakes. Inside was a bale of hay, perhaps for an army exercise, and the front was kind of enterable. There were hundreds of them, in rows, but no one was to be seen. Checking no one was around, I popped into the field, jumping over the gate, and went and looked into one of the first ones. Inside was a bale of hay, perfect for sleeping in. In I climbed, opened the bale of hay, got my blanket out and my little sleeping bag, and made myself quite comfortable. I became nice and warm. I felt very good about my idea. I fell deep asleep. I awoke to hear screeching, piercing, squealing, deafening sound. To my alarm and horror, my hair stood up on end. It must have been, 2 o'clock in the morning or so, the middle of the night. The loudest scream you'd ever heard. Screeched and ripped the night apart, echoing around the forests. It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. My heart was beating, and there I was, looking at the entrance of my little shelter, wondering what was out there. And then it stopped. I wondered what on earth it was. It seemed to me it could only have been the sound of some kind of, I don't know, either like a wolf, tiger, maybe even a dragon or something, I don't know, or to push some kind of electric guitar feeding back through an enormous sound system. Maybe there was going to be a rock concert over the weekend or something nearby, and they were just putting up the PA system. It was incredibly loud and horrifying. A screaming squeal. I eventually managed to calm my heart. The sound didn't come again, and I managed to sleep. As dawn was coming up, I crawled out. A farmer was nearby. He came over. He was on his tractor. He stopped, looking at me in horror. He said, "Did you just sleep in there?" I said, "Yes, I'm sorry. Is that all right?" He said, "Yeah, but..." And he pointed to the other end of the field and some mist. And there were enormous pigs, the size of small cars, with their tiny little piglet herds. He said, "They'll eat you alive, so they will." And I realized quite how close I'd come. Recently I heard a story. There was once a monk's funeral where someone had made a riveted metal coffin. The metal coffin was put on top of a fire. When the fire took hold, the rivets popped, the coffin blackened and burst. And as the fire roared, the monks ran around with buckets of water. The senior monk just shook his head, quietly went back to his kuti, lay down as the whole thing exploded, rivets pinging everywhere. Sometimes the Dhamma teaches without words. As you listen to this, you might notice how familiar things like the search for shelter really is. Not just for a wandering monk, but for anyone who has lived long enough to know fear, uncertainty, and not knowing what comes next. You may recognize how often we mistake safety for shelter, and shelter for certainty. You might reflect on the times in your own life when you lay down thinking you were safe, only to discover later how close you had been to danger, illness, loss, misunderstanding, or just sudden change. You may sense how the body reacts before the mind does, how fear arises quickly, and how calm sometimes returns only after we survive what we didn't understand at the time. And you may quietly consider this: how much of our life has been lived trusting shelters that were temporary, borrowed, and how even so, something has carried us through again and again without any explanation. Moments of misjudgment. On another occasion, this time in Jerusalem, Israel, where I was living in the ancient city within the walls, I was looking for a hostel, a particular hostel, and I asked some boys who were working inside a sort of small sewing shop. I asked, "Excuse me, where is that Green Door hostel?" And they looked at me, and one of them then pointed into the sewing machine shop towards the back. And I thought, aha, there must be a shortcut. Thanking them graciously, I went through. Clatter, kaboomf, there was only a broom cupboard up there. They all laughed. I felt pretty ridiculous. And on the way out, they asked me, "What's your name? What's your name? What's your name?" And I said in Arabic, "Akhna Majnoon, I'm the fool." To my amazement and horror, the cheekiest, loudest one who'd done all the pointing, now face flushed, eyes fierce, suddenly picked up the long tailor scissors and lunged at my head. Now, my instincts during that particular day, I'd made a kind of resolve. I will not back down at anyone who again tries to confront me. I will stand my ground. Now, this idea didn't go according to plan. It escalated and escalated, chaotic noise and shouting, with the boy bringing the scissors to within an inch of my head. Fortunately, adults came in and broke it all up, and we both relaxed. It was a very near dramatic, even near fatal experience. Sometimes a moment's unmindfulness of speech or perception or intention can invite all kinds of turmoil. As you hear this, you may recognize how small misunderstandings can suddenly carry real weight. Many of us have had moments where we misread a situation, trusted the wrong cue, or spoke too loudly, and only afterwards realized how much was at stake. You might remember times when pride, embarrassment, or a silent inner vow pushed things further than they needed to go. Perhaps you can feel how quickly the body tightens when danger appears, and how instinct can override good intentions. And you may quietly reflect on how often life turned on something tiny, a word, a gesture, a glance, reminding us that mindfulness is not only about being calm all the time, but about noticing when we are no longer present before the cost becomes too high. For most people, death and aging go together. In the modern world of texting on phones and chat groups, I'd like to offer a guide to texting for seniors, in case you get, left behind. Now, BFF, best friend fell. BTW, bring the wheelchair. TTYL, talk to you louder. BYOT, bring your own teeth. LMDO, laughing my dentures out. FWIW, forgot where I was. IMHAO, is my hearing aid on? OMMR, on my massage recliner. ROFLACGU, rolling on the floor laughing and can't get up. So to meditation, the love of the ordinary and an ordinary kind of love. Death is not something separate from this moment. It's already here, quietly in the body, in breath, in arising, in breath, passing away, in warmth, in cooling. Nothing special needs to be understood. What changes, changes. So for now, let the body be where it is. Feel the touch and weight of it. Feel the contact with the ground and your clothing. Let breathing happen all by itself. No need to adjust it. No need to make sense of anything. Just this ordinary life, unfolding moment by moment. As Oscar Wilde was dying, he looked at the wallpaper and said, either that wallpaper goes, or I do. And from here, we can all be silent.